All right, everybody, the moment's here, and it's season 3, episode 1, PincheAls Garage. Load intro.
Next time.
Today, we got a very special episode, and this episode's pretty much about a MK7 GTI and our big, hopefully, sponsor. We're going to do their actual first time coilover video for them, and it's for Solo-Werks. There's our lad right here. Oh yeah, we got Solo-Werks to do this. This is so legit. So we're going to do the unboxing of the Solo-Werks coilovers. If you guys see here, this is going to be the Solo-Werks S1 coilover suspension for an MK7 GTI. What they gave us little waterproof lubrication, rust and corrosion protection for the coilovers. Here's the spanner wrenches that they come in the box. They give you 3 of them. The front struts here, if you look inside the packaging, make sure you guys get the little nut that comes inside. If it's not loose in the bag, it should be right up here. Already kind of started on threads. Make sure that they have both of the nuts actually inside the packaging. After that, we're going to go to the shock for the rears. There should be a nut right inside the packaging. Looks like it's taped to the actual adapter here on the coil on the shock. Just make sure you have both of the nuts in there. We have our springs, and then we actually have the actual spanning or the adjustments for the actual springs here. Make sure in the package you got the adjustment here and the actual lower portion for the rear springs here. So this is pretty much what comes in your Solo-Werks box. Make sure all the components are in there. You guys don't want to make sure you're not losing anything before you start your project. Once you see all this and you verify you have the same stuff, get started on jacking your car up. Alright, so to jack your car up on these guys, one of the big things that we had to make sure that it's safe when we jack it up. Make sure when you get your jack, use the pinch weld that's about 3 inches from the front. You'll see there's about a 6-inch little bar right here. This bar is actually what you're going to use to jack your car up. Once you have it at the appropriate height that you want it at, I go about 10 inches, if that. All the way down here. Oh man, we're actually not even in the air, but we'll figure that out right now. Because we have the car on all 4s on jack stands, because we're going to do pretty much the whole entire suspension at once instead of one side at a time. Depending on what you guys have at home, remember we're doing everything the way that you would do it at home. So if you have 4 jack stands, by all means put it up in the air and put all 4 jack stands up. If you only have 2, do the front first and then do the back, because the back you're going to do it very quick. But once you have the car up in the air, you're going to use the control arm rear bolt to set the car on, because this has actually the most safest and the most strongest part of the car when you have the car up in the air. For the rear, if you guys come down this way, same process, jack it up. If you actually see right here, there's about a 2-inch gap on the back, and you see this big rail right here. This is where you're actually going to lift the car up. This is the lift point. And if you move over to the left of it, you still have a safe lift point or a pinch weld here to put your jack stand underneath. These are safe because these are the strongest points on the rail on the back of the car. Depending on how big your jack stands are, you can also use the rear control arm and set the jack stand underneath. Just make sure that your jack stand actually has a curved bottom, because if not, they can slide if they're not set properly. We prefer the pinch weld. That's because it's the furthest away from the workstation that you're going to be working at. This just allows for more safety and just more room to work. Alright, so the first thing you guys need to do is work on the cowl on the very top. So when you pop your hood open, you'll see this little rubber strip right here. You're just going to pull this straight up. There's really nothing crazy about this. Pull that straight up, make sure it's just out of the way. You have these little rubber bushings here that looks like they're pretty stuck in there. Let's see here. Yep, just move them back a little bit, and it should just give you some access to the actual suspension component here on top. Let's see here. So once you take the rubber piece off, if you actually look right over here, there's a little clip about an inch wide. You're going to pull it straight back, get it out of the little plastic clip down there. Same thing over here, little clip, take it off. This will give you access to the cowl to be able to take it off. If you pull it straight up, there are the 3 bolts you're going to need. Those are going to be 12 or 13 millimeters. We'll double check that right now in just a minute. You're going to need to take those 3 off on the right and the left side. You don't only have to take the whole cowl off. This just gives you enough space right here to just take those 3 bolts off and get that going. I recommend loosening these a little bit to start off before you actually get to the bottom and get that going. Down below, right here, once you're down here, your sway bar end link right here has an 18 millimeter. Same with your strut bolt down here, down below. It's an 18, and I believe it's a 14 millimeter triple square that holds that bolt in place. You're also going to have, come over here, Roman. There you go. Got my lighting here. A 10 millimeter bolt right here that holds the brake line and the actual ABS sensor right in front of the car. Those are going to be very, very important. One of the big things that I actually learned from a friend of mine here at the shop is that we actually have to take the axles off from the transmission on the inside. This is going to give us access to move the actual spindle here away from the car to get the strut actually out from the car here. So as a pre-warning, make sure you remove that. And then down below on the ball joint, there's 3 here bolts. You're going to need a 16 millimeter to take these off. These are the part of the ball joint. You're also going to get like a big flathead screwdriver to cram down there to pry this off, because they stay on with some pretty decent amount of pressure. So that's your prep work right now before we actually take the actual suspension apart. Now, if you guys can see this down below, there's 3 bolts down here that hold the ball joint and the control arm to the spindle. There's 3 16s. Take that off. Now, if you guys can see my finger here on top, you're going to need to get a flathead screwdriver right there and pry down. What this is going to do is separate the ball joint from the control arm, and that's going to allow us to pretty much pull the spindle away from the car after we remove it from the actual axle here. You see where my hand is. There's 6 of these triple squares. You're going to think, I believe they're M10s, but don't quote me on that yet. I'll double check it right now. So as you guys can see right here, so to break loose the axle by yourself, if you don't have any help right now at the moment, make sure you bring a flathead screwdriver, put it in one of the rotors and hold it there. What that allows you to do is going to lock the car up for you, so you'll be able to actually break loose the actual axle bolts. And they are M10s, like I said previously. There's 6 of them in total, and every 2 you take off, there's a little bracket here that comes on there. And remember that you got to put those 2 bolts per bracket. If not, I don't know what they're for. I believe they're probably for holding tension, or some type of washer. So just make sure you put those back on when you reinstall your axle. So we have this really cool tool here from Seaon, I believe. This is the actual spreader tool for the spindle or the strut. So pretty much this gives us a space, put it on the back, or strut splitter, there you go, thank you. Put it on the back. You can get this from ECS Tuning for about 20-30 bucks. It makes your life a heck of a lot easier to get the strut out of the tower here. So you're going to place it on the back. You're going to put it in there in the slot, twist it until it's 90 degrees this way. Once you do that, this pretty much the spindle will start dropping, and this will allow us to get the strut out of the tower much quicker than using like a chisel and hammer like I always do. Alright, so once the strut is actually out of the car, the next thing you're going to need a 21mm and an impact gun. We recommend that you put your foot on the actual spring. Since we're not going to be reusing the tower, it doesn't really matter if we damage this portion. All we really need is just the strut cap. So just remember, use an impact gun, hold it down, and just go at it. And just like that, it comes apart, and all we need is just this one piece. The bolt that comes, the nut that comes off of it is useless for us. We just need the cap. And then just get your new coilover over here. We don't need that. Don't need the dust cap. So once you get your coilover up, make sure that you actually lower it as much as you can, because you don't want to put any tension on the spring. This goes right on top. Solo-Werks provides a little anti-rust fluid, which you're going to need to rust up the threads. Lube up the threads that are here and on the bottom. There it is, the bearing that we need. You're going to lube up the bearing right around here. This is going to pretty much prevent any rusting on the actual spring that you see down here at the bottom. So if you guys see that, apply the lube that's provided from the Solo-Werks kit onto here and onto the threads, so it prevents any of the rusting on the unit. So pretty much once you got your bolt all the way down, the nut all the way down, you guys want to torque this down to 44 foot-pounds with a 90-degree turn, as per Solo-Werks' specifications. So make sure you have pretty much all the way through socket and then an Allen bit on top to tighten that sucker down. Alright, so with the strut back in place, you're going to reverse the process on how you removed it and reinstall it. One of the big things though, on the top of the strut cap, there's two arrows on it. Those two arrows have to be pointing towards the car, towards the engine. The reason for it, it allows you to line up the 3 bolts properly, because they only go on one way. So there's really no wrong way to put it in, so just make sure you remember to do that. We highly recommend to have a buddy, like a Roman. There's a Roman right there. There's a Max and a Reach right over there. We're all here trying to just work on Roman's car tonight and getting these Solo-Werks coilovers on so he can be ready for SoCal Euro this year. To start off with, we're not done, even close to done on this car, but this is what we're doing tonight. So he's got those on. Once you have them on nice and tight, get the spindle back on. Like I was saying, do everything in reverse. That way you put everything back the way it was. Make sure you disconnect the ABS line, the brake line. This is going to give you the ability to make sure everything is on there, and you can pull it off and put it back on without causing any issues. Alright, so with the strut now mounted and the end link put back in place, now you can take your jack out of the way, and this is going to allow you pretty much to get the axle and the ball joint in. But remember, the axle has to be placed back in its cup. If you don't, you're never going to be able to get the whole entire assembly back into place. So make sure the axle's back inside the cup, and that way this will allow you to get the ball joint back in place, but always keeping in mind that this axle needs to be lined up, because if you don't, it's just going to fall right out and you're going to do all this over again. And there you go. So Axle in first, ball joint in next by bending the control arm up and down, and this will keep everything lined up. Once you do that, pull everything back together and tighten everything back down to spec. Your torque specs are going to be online. Just use VW Vortex or just Google either or for putting everything back together on this side. We're about to go to the back and show you how to do that. Alright everybody, so now for the rear, you're going to need an 18 socket and a wrench, because you got to hold the bolt and then break it loose on the other side. You're going to need to take off the one for the shock, the one for the actual control arm, which are both 18s. Up on top, if you see up here, there are 16s up here. Now there's a catch to this one on this side for the passenger rear. Actually no, driver rear, I'm sorry. The bolts are at an angle. So it's kind of a tricky method to get them out of there. Just keep trying, but you need a really long extension. I recommend a 6 or 8 inch extension when you do this, just because it's kind of hard to do with a shorter socket. So make sure you guys have extensions for this. Once you break that loose, and the bottom one, the 18, it should come down. Before you take the one for the control arm off, make sure you guys put your jack right underneath the spring to put some tension on it. And once you actually do that, and compress the spring just slightly, and then once everything is unbolted and all the bolts are out, you guys are going to want to take the leveler over here in the back. I don't know if you guys see my finger right here, but right over here against the back, you need a flathead screwdriver and pop that out, because if once you drop the control arm, you're going to actually break that. So make sure that you pop that off on the bottom with a flathead screwdriver, take it off and out of the way. Make sure it doesn't get caught on anything, because this is a common thing that a lot of people do and break, and it's not a cheap repair. So make sure you guys do that first or towards the end, but don't take off the control arm when you do that. So if you guys see here, we took off pretty much the rear control arm bolt, the shock bolt, and then back here there's the rear sway bar bolt. It's a 13 millimeter. With your jack, once you compress it, these bolts will pretty much slide right out with a little bit of wiggle and a hammer. Smack them a little bit just to break them loose, and they'll come right out. Once you do that, you drop the jack down. Drop the jack all the way down, and this will pretty much decompress the spring, and then you just pop this sucker out of the socket, and that's done for that. And then we'll show you what to do next. Don't go too far back, it's okay. So pretty much once you guys get the shock out, you guys need the strut, the shock cap that's on top. There's a little black cap right here. Pull it off. Shows off the nut right here. It's a 16 millimeter. There's a problem with this. You're supposed to be able to put a socket in here and then a little bit on top of this to spin it off. I don't know many people who have a tool that can actually do that. So what I recommend is get your impact gun, put it on top with the 16, hold the cap because it's going to spin, and pretty much pulse it until it comes off. Only way you're going to be able to take it off in here that we've been able to figure out. You're going to reverse the process, however you're going to need to take the dust cap off, because Solo-Werks provides you with the new bump stop on the new shock, which we'll show you in just a second. So you guys can see here on the right, this is the stock Mark 7 shock. You'll notice it's about 2 inches taller than the Solo-Werks one, and you'll notice that the Solo-Werks one's a lot shorter. Same with the bump stop. If you see the Mark 7 bump stop comparison to the Solo-Werks one, it's a huge difference. And the reason for this, better dampening on the aftermarket one versus the stock, so it's going to have a better rate, and the car will definitely handle more, a lot better, and it'll be a stiffer ride from stock. So definitely you're going to notice a big difference when you guys are driving the car. But one thing you want to remember is the shock cap you have to preserve, so get rid of this one. And then on the cap here, same way you had it on originally. So make sure you guys put this back on, zip tie it back the way it was, and this can go back in here. and just insert all the way back, and then reinstall this with the new nut that's provided from the Solo-Werks kit. Tighten it back down, and then reinstall it pretty much, and reverse the process on the rear of the car. Alright guys, so for the rear springs to remount, only leave the perch down below. The perch on top, take off the rubber, use the provided perch from Solo-Werks with the adjustment height. Right now we're going pretty low, so he wants them all the way down to the bottom. Put that there. Reverse the process for installing your springs, but always remember, use the jack to compress it for you so everything lines up the way it's supposed to. What I would recommend first is the sway bar in the rear first install, then the shock, and then the actual spindle or the control arm to the spindle. That way you guys can line everything up pretty smoothly. Alright, so we're going to do a recap, everybody. So pretty much the rear suspension is identical on both sides except for one part. And I'll show you that in just a minute, but this is how it's going to go. 16 millimeter on top, and there's two of them, one on each side. Two 18 millimeters here, a 13 millimeter for the rear sway, and you need a jack underneath to prevent the spring that's on here from decompressing and shooting out of the car. Same process on the other side. However, there's one extra step. There's a big canister right here, and there's a 13 millimeter bolt on the other side, and I'll show you in just a second. You see this canister right here, this black thing? On the left, I mean that's the shock. On the left of that, there's a black canister. Follow it all the way down. There's a 13 millimeter bolt on there. Take the bolt off. Pull the canister straight down, but not hard. Once it comes out of its little socket on top, it's going to give you the amount of space you need to take the bolt that's on top on the left hand side, because it's covered by that. You guys will see it when you guys get there. It's part of the most annoying thing out of this whole project for the rear, and that's pretty much it.